Welcome back to The Comfy Chairs, a podcast from 123 Limited. This is Kate, and I love a good story. Stories serve many functions. Not only do they entertain, they can teach, honor, and even caution us. Stories can also shape identity. These are the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. I create a story of myself, and you do the same. We also tell people the stories we've created about them, and we listen to those stories. We're hardwired for it after all. But what if those stories are intended to hurt? What if they are just not true? In both leading and learning, recognizing the power of stories is vital. And as with so many things here at the Comfy Chairs, it starts with self-awareness. Asking, what stories have I allowed to shape me? What is my story? And do I truly own my own story? Today's guest is a storyteller. She has worked in the nonprofit space for over 20 years, empowering people facing poverty. And she recently published a memoir recounting her own journey of self-empowerment and reclaiming her story. Welcome to the Comfy Chairs, Shama. I always like to ask my guests to introduce themselves. So would you please do that for us?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's always hard for me to introduce myself because the first thing that comes to my mind is I'm a mother.
It's a great starting place.
Yeah. I have two wonderful daughters, and I am a survivor, a writer, and somebody who is an advocate. And I do my advocacy through the work that I do in the nonprofit sector. I think that pretty much sums it up for me as to my intro.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Like I said, that's a great place to start. And it captures so much of who you are. I did have the chance to read your memoir earlier this year. It's very powerful. And while it's not the subject of our conversation today, I just want to make certain that we showcase the fact that you've recently had that published. I'm so glad to be talking to somebody that is a self-proclaimed storyteller, because stories are my favorite thing. Movies, books, listening to people tell their own tales. If it's a story, I'm there for it. I believe they're very powerful. They create connection like nothing else can. And where I'd like us to start is, what are your thoughts on the role of stories in our lives?
We all have one, or more than one. And I think that's more we listen to each other's story, I think we realize more we have in common. I think, just society, politics, historically, we are made to look at our differences and not our commonality. And I think that stories kind of evens the field, because underneath, all the details may be different, but underneath it all, everybody's looking for love, acceptance, belonging. It's the core of it is all the same. And that's what I find to be so powerful, is when you can hear that, then it humanizes, it brings us closer together.
I love that, Shama, and I agree with you 1,000%. We are made for stories, to tell them, to respond to them, and it evens the playing field for us, and it shows us that this is our humanity, and I think we need more of that in the world.
Definitely.
Stories don't require reading, but it is such a common thread when we talk about stories. We tend to default to books or other things that we can consume. There's a story I like to tell on myself. When I was very little, I was desperate to learn to read. And I would beg my mother, and for some reason she was hesitant to teach me, even though she read to me all the time. And she would tell me She's like, when you get to first grade, they're going to teach you how to read. And I remember this so distinctly, even though I was, tiny. I came home from the first day of first grade incensed because they had not taught us how to read. Literacy, it's powerful, just like stories are. It's a tool for empowerment. You are what I've seen in your work life and your writing and in our conversations. You are all about empowering people. Something I was very much struck by in your memoir, there was a line where you talked about the children in the village where you lived when you were quite little, that they and, well, their parents as well, were illiterate
yeah.
and depended upon the religious figures basically for their information and their understanding of the world. Plus, you were delayed from learning how to read for such a long time, and that resonated for me because even though I got to read in first grade, I craved it so much. And that's what I saw come through in your story, is you craved the ability to read. And I'm really curious to know what impact being able to consume stories on your own has had on your ability to reclaim your personal story.
Growing up, there were incidents of abuse and or misinformation, and being told that that was what God intended, because in the small village that I lived in, it was very everything was related to religion, and you never question. In my culture, growing up, you just don't question the will of God. And so, but in my gut, it didn't feel right, but I couldn't like look at the Quran and find my own interpretation or read it because I didn't know how to read. And I'll give you a really a, a a big example much later in my life. So when I was 15, my father passed away. And um, this was back in the early 1980s. And I was not allowed to attend his funeral because I was menstruating. And I was told that you were considered dirty. What struck me at that time, and I remember it, is that I have two older sisters. So I thought, what sin did my father commit to have three daughters and none of us could attend his burial? It just didn't make any sense to me. Fast forward, I don't know, maybe 10 years later, I went and to get my master's. My dissertation was on the perception of blood in Islam and Judaism. So, because I wanted to read and get my own, like, see it from my own eye and understand it myself versus accepting somebody else's interpretation. And that to me is empowering, being able to even make reference, because for some, what I had to do a lot in my personal life, I feel like, is to equip myself. That's why education and being educated and being able to read was so important for me. And also from my childhood, from what I remember in the village, that they were people who genuinely believed, because they didn't know the difference.
Yeah.
They didn't know what they were being told, and they weren't educated. They were illiterate. They didn't know how to read. And so they kind of blindly believed. And I never wanted to be that person. I wanted to read it for myself and decide if I'm going to choose that. And that's kind of where I think our power comes from, right?
Shama, I am constantly on the lookout for what's the story, what's the lesson specifically for leaders. And that's kind of where my heart is, helping leaders learn. And I think the lesson here is that be very careful if you find yourself controlling access to information. Transparency is so important to ensuring that your people are equipped, knowledgeable, and empowered to do whatever work is in front of them. That if you're keeping stuff from your employees, it should be a personal red flag that you've lost the script somehow.
Absolutely. And I think that secrecy is, I mean, moment you build some sense of secrecy, that's when doubt comes in and distrust and you just get into that spiral. I've seen leaders, they in their mind they're protecting by not sharing.
Yeah.
And so they're trying to be a caretaker, but it actually backfires because it's better to be transparent than and let people see it for themselves. And because no one, people won't interpret everything just the way you do. So it's just best to kind of put that out there and let them decide versus trying to protect.
There are obviously, it's easy to make this sound like it's blanket statements. There will obviously be occasions where, because of non-disclosures or proprietary or legal reasons, where as a leader you can't just put everything out there, and you have to make the story evident to people. Now, you've been in leadership for a number of years. I'm really curious what role storytelling has played in your work.
Well, when you get to sit at the table where decisions are being made, it is really important to be able to communicate why those decisions were made, what some of the criteria we thought about. Because when you don't share, people, we are, like we were talking about earlier, we are storytellers, right?
Yeah.
So moment you don't complete a story, guess what? I will complete it for you. And it's often not correct. They don't know all that the management is doing this fine dance with the board, with the funders' need, and the public perception and all of that. So the decisions aren't just being made in a vacuum. I think where management often fails is the way they communicate it. And I think that often we get into, like the way my parents were, don't ask, I'm your mom. I said it, so you just do it. Well, that's not how your employees operate. They want to know how those decisions were made. And yes, you do have to sit there and explain to them, especially in the nonprofit sector, when we are steward of other people's money and their trust and their well-being. Yeah. We need to be questioned. We need to be able to defend our decisions, to making sure that we are being a true steward of those funds and the trust.
We've talked a little bit about some leaders keep information from employees because they want to protect them. And you've caught on this point, Shama, that it's so important that we're engaging with respect and treating people with dignity when it comes to the information and the stories that we tell them in everything, but especially in the workspace.
Yeah, and also I think it's important to kind of refrain from telling to how they play a role in that story.
I love that, because we're all making the story together.
Yeah. So that gives everybody a sense of ownership, and that they can kind of shape it.
Yeah.
They have a little bit of control in how it shapes.
Yeah. Well, you talked about stewardship earlier. In nonprofit work, that's always kind of front of mind. But in any sector, I think it's important for leaders to see themselves as the stewards of their employees' skills, needs, abilities, and also in this space, stewards of the shared story. So you don't own it, but you care for it.
Yes. Yes.
Well, I was listening to you. You were talking about interpretation, and one of the points I think is important to make is whatever I think the story is may not actually be the truth. The way I come across it, or how, if there are gaps and I fill in the gaps for myself, I can very likely be wrong. So having the ability to validate the story that I've told myself is so important. I don't know if you're familiar with Crucial Conversations. One of the core skills in Crucial Conversations is this idea of mastering my story. It's important when I'm going into that event where I have big thoughts, big feelings, there's something big on the line, that I recognize that I have told myself a story about the other person or the event. And it's just that. It's a story. It's not necessarily tied to fact. And you have to, it's okay that you took that input, whoever you saw or heard or encountered, you took the input and you interpreted it. We're made to do that. It's what keeps us safe. And just because I've told myself the story doesn't mean it's entirely factual. So I kind of need to hit pause on my interpretation and go into that exchange with curiosity to discover what's something that I might have missed. I firmly believe, after years of teaching it and trying to practice it, that is the fundamental skill that could change people's lives. If we recognize, I'm telling myself a story about this, but I need to hold up for a moment and figure out, do I have all the facts? Is this true? Is it an emotional amygdala response or something else? And talking about stories and leadership, I think that's what I want leaders to kind of take away, is I'm responsible for the stories of my people, but I'm also responsible for managing my own story.
Absolutely.
That I'm not like forcing my interpretation as reality or truth onto everyone else. I've talked a lot. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Would love to hear your thoughts on leading with stories as well.
I'm going to go back to Brene Brown, because
Yay.
One of her things she says is, because we're wired for stories, when we don't get a clear answer, we kind of fill in the blank, just like you were saying. And it has taken me several decades to finally get, and this is not just for workplace, this is in our personal relationship and everywhere. And it's taken me a really long time to be able to go, this is what I'm telling myself. And most often I found, but by owning that, what it does is makes other a lot more aware of how certain things are being interpreted, because we all come into our workplace in every relationship with our own baggages. And so it's really, to me, being a leader, it's so much more than just knowing the craft. It's knowing about human psychology. For me, one of the, and being in the nonprofit sector, one of my things that I prioritize is always finding what is my employees' why. It's fine if your why is because, well, I need to pay my bills. That's why I have this job. Perfectly fine. Whatever your why is, then I work to meet that. To me, the best way to get individuals, especially sharing it with management, is by you first being vulnerable and sharing your story. And that's where you break some of the walls and kind of make it okay for them to be able to share. Last week, we had one of our state officials at our office doing some visiting. It just felt like a very formal type of a setup or exchange. You know, we're just being polite. And I turned around and I said, if I may be so bold, I would love to know what got you into politics, because this is not an easy job. And it was almost like nobody's asked him, like, because usually people are asking, what can you do for me? What can you do for me? And he started talking and went back, you know, a couple of decades and when he started, and his body language, everything like just changed. The whole vibe of the room changed. And I genuinely wanted to know, but and because he was sharing, I was able to tap into what was his why and how can I connect his why with our why, and show that we're ultimately doing the same thing, just we're coming from a different angle. It ended up being really pleasantly just wonderful. And in that little time, I feel like I really got to know him, like the core of who he is, you know?
Mhm.
And but again, it's being able to, but before I asked him, I shared that I was a first generation coming to this country, and watching my father, who, you know, passed away when I was 15, but way overqualified, couldn't find job because he
Yeah.
had a thick accent. We were in the South. It was in the 70s, you know, all that stuff. And it was so easy for someone to fall in through the cracks because
Mm.
there were just so many barriers, right? And that's why I do the job I do, because I've seen those cracks, and if I can help mend a few for some folks, that would be fulfilling for me. I hope that he left feeling kind of like reminded of his why that kind of carried him through the day.
You have done the thing for us, Shama. You have told us not just here's the practice, you have given us a story to go along with it. Um, so thank you for demonstrating exactly what we're talking about and making those points so strongly that a simple question like what got you into this work opens this opportunity to learn about someone, to create a sense of community, for them to feel seen and heard and appreciated. And to your last point, to also invigorate each other. That was fabulous. Thank you. How do you think we make stories good and useful? And of what makes a good story, and how do we go about putting them out into the world?
I think what makes a good story is it's genuine.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be yeah, it doesn't have to be flowery or anything. It just needs to be genuine. Um, and it doesn't always have to be a happy ending. I think
Agreed.
um, you know, like sometimes when I watch a movie and there's not a happy ending, I actually appreciate it because life isn't always a happy ending. So don't sugarcoat it for me, right? But what I love is that you can still find moments, if not uh, more than just moments of triumph throughout the struggle.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it a good story. Also, something that's relatable. In order for it to be relatable, we have to get down to the core of what we all desire. You know, we don't control where we're born or who we are born to, but the core of all of our desires and needs are the same. A few years back, I was working for a nonprofit that dealt with sex trafficking,
Mm.
and that was something that was very, very important work for us, and how we shared those victims and survivors stories, that we didn't re-victimize them, by the way we shared it.
Some stories are easier to tell than others. Some are almost impossible to share. And there can be value in sharing those really hard, difficult stories too. But I think we have to see if I can get this idea out of my head and into the world. How do we choose when the hard story is the right story? And then how do we prepare ourselves and others? Kind of to your point, so that we're not re-traumatizing, that we're not creating new trauma, that we're using the story for good, not just for like shock value. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And there is so much debate over that. I always get down to is my intent, that I can't control how you're going to interpret it. And so I always have to go to me and what my intent is with sharing that. And especially if it's somebody else's story that I am being the voice for, it is a responsibility in knowing how you tell it. And I struggle with that often, especially when it's about a child.
It's a difficult space for us to talk about, and I don't want I don't want my curiosity to be problematic, and two, it's exactly kind of the question I was asking, that sometimes talking about the really hard things, well, it may seem like it's the thing to do, we need to choose not to tell the hard stories.
People have to earn that trust to hear our story.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's not for everybody to consume unless you're ready for it. It has to be, I need to trust, what are you going to do with that story? Is that going to change the way you behave, maybe change your perception of people who are trafficked, people who trafficked or whatever. The disconnect happen is that usually people who have money, power, are hearing stories or wanting stories from those who are marginalized. And for me, regardless of where you stand, you still have to earn the trust to hear that person's story.
Intent is such an important aspect of this. You talked about, what is my intent? I believe we need to constantly kind of check, what are my intentions? What are my intentions? And does that intent line up with the potential impact?
It's a huge responsibility, right? When you are the storyteller.
We talked about stewardship earlier.
Yeah.
That's something, as I've been thinking about this subject of stories and storytelling, there are different roles. There's the creator, the teller, and then the listener, that receiver. And frankly, we can fulfill all roles at once. We've talked on the podcast before about imposter syndrome, and that is a case where I have made the story, I tell the story, and I eat it up as well. I consume it, I listen to it, and I start using that negative story to impact how I think about myself. So this is where I think talking about identity and stories is so important. It's not just how are we influencing the way people perceive somebody else. What am I doing to myself with my own stories?
And we do it in a big way and little way all the time. I don't know if it's age or what, but I've gotten to a place where I can catch it. This last week, I had went by this bookstore because I knew they had copies of my book. I'm looking at the memoir section, and I mean, I looked through everything, alphabetically with title or last name, and it's just not there. So I was like, oh, okay. So finally, I went up and asked the cashier, and she said, oh, it would be over. And she took me back to the same section,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't there. So she said, well, my computer shows I have a couple of copies. And I thought, oh, maybe it's in the back, and they don't even want to put it out. Like it's not worth it and all that. She said, let
Oh.
me find. And I was like, no, it's all right. A few minutes later, she finds me and she said, well, it's not on the shelf because it's on a display. And she walks me over to the display, and I'm like, wow, like within second, I had a whole thesis written.
Yeah. Right.
And it wasn't just about the book. Then it was my own self worth. It was blah, 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 blah. It just kind of spirals. And yeah. So,
And at no point did you probably even entertain the idea that maybe they've already sold out. Right? Like never mind that middle ground of, oh, it's on a display where it's going to get seen. No, it's they've got it hidden in the back. It's not good enough. I'm not good enough.
yeah.
I'm glad that you recognized that as a bad story you were telling yourself. I appreciate you sharing it, and I am in some ways kind of I'm heartened because I do the same thing, and it's so nice to hear that I'm not alone in that space. We're not good stewards of our own stories is what it comes down to, I think.
No, no,
Yeah.
not at all.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that we've been proven wrong so many times. But I think part of it is our defense mechanism because
Mhm.
we don't want to be disappointed. We don't want to be hurt. So we rather, if we can call it, then
Yeah.
it won't bother us if she did come back and say it's in the back of the room. Well, I figured it was, so no biggie.
Mhm.
Like
Oh,
kind
I
of
already
that.
know the worst that can happen. I've prepared myself.
Exactly. Except you don't prepare yourself. You still are hurt. So why do
Yeah.
that to yourself? Yeah. I know that intellectually. There's so many things we know intellectually, but
And it doesn't help us at all, does it? No. Well, you're exactly right. It is protection, and I think that's an important if we're going to talk about stories and storytelling, talking about that defense mechanism is really important. We are so good at interpreting events and things around us. My book isn't on the shelf, or I heard a rustle in the bushes. We are so good at that because it's survival. So when we tell ourselves a bad story about ourselves or someone else, it's not because we're bad or we're problematic. It's that we are wired to keep ourselves safe. And stories play a big role in that. And I think it's important for us, for people that lead or coach or just want good for other folks, to really examine, does this story create safety or not? And if it doesn't, is there something to be gained from it not creating safety? Because there could be, a lesson to learn or something. And I want to go back. You used the word genuine in what makes a good story. As I was reflecting, the word I came up with is a good story is a story that's true. It doesn't mean that it's factual, but that it is true to the fundamental human experience. I tend to default to thinking about fiction. And I was thinking about like Lord of the Rings is a good story because it's true in terms of sacrifice and bravery. Stephen King has made probably billions of dollars at this point because he has figured out how to tap into shared fears.
mm,
They're telling these true stories, even if they're wild and fantastical. And that's a lesson that I want for leaders to understand, is that the good stories need to be true for your people. How do they connect them to the work, to their success, to each other or the organization?
Yeah. And I think as a leader, by listening to other story, it kind of it says to them, I see you. I mean, I've talked about we in the core we're all the same, but our experiences are different. And so by honoring and listening to that, you have a shared vision, shared experience, but I also see your individualness, and that's important as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. You raised a point earlier that we all have these past experiences. We all bring our baggage, we all bring our stories into every interaction we have. Those stories are constantly at play as we're writing the new chapter, paragraph, what have you. I would like to hear, please, your advice about how do we help that next chapter be good for people when we are part of their story. You've talked some about it already, but I'd like to kind of put a fine point. What are the things that you take with you to make other people's stories better by having encountered you?
Wow. I don't know how I make their stories better. I think by empowering them to just tell their story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think because making it better is kind of subjective, I guess.
That's fair.
And so
Yeah.
I, yeah, I mean, even like in my current role with workforce development and all of that, I feel like my job really is to get the resources so that individual can live whatever their best life is.
Yeah.
And that's kind of my contribution, is to kind of give you the resources, give you the platform to share your story
Yeah.
in whatever way that works.
I think that's a better way to talk about it. Thank you for getting my messy question to a better place. I have a closing question, but before that, I'm curious, what are 2 or 3 things that you would want to highlight to make certain that it's a good takeaway for everyone?
That leadership is just a title,
Mm-hmm.
and bringing your humanity alongside your title is essential for a leader. And that comes through connecting with, your employees, just your community. And the connection comes through authentic, genuine stories.
I love that. Love it, love it, love it. Thank you. I can't agree anymore. I would add, if I may be so bold, that human leaders need to also recognize that they are stewards of other people's, other humans' stories. And that is an honor and a responsibility.
Absolutely.
Here's what I would love to hear from you. What is a story that you would recommend to us?
A story I would recommend would be a story that is not easily available.
Okay.
And but it needs to be heard. So it may not be on the mainstream. People aren't talking about it, and we our media picks up whatever, and we move on. We like, oh, we've solved the genocide in Darfur, or we solved, so, no, we haven't. We just it's not on the mainstream. And I think that those are the stories that we need to make a conscious effort to look for and read or listen to, because those are the ones that are really important. Because if we don't, they will get lost.
Are there any recent reports that you would recommend? Anything that you would like for me to share in a link to kind of give us a springboard to getting better connected to those off the beaten path stories?
I would recommend looking at clothing factories.
Oh, yeah.
Coming from Bangladesh, looking at child labor, clothing factories, the environment in which the fashion that you and I get to wear in America, where it actually comes from, and the condition in which people work.
Thank you. Yeah, that's I feel like you've taken us full circle to something we talked about earlier around information and educating yourself. That it's very easy to move through the world not knowing things like where were my shoes made,
Mm-hmm.
and we have some responsibility to
We do.
see for ourselves, to read the text, or ourselves, to understand what's happening in the world around us. Thank you for that recommendation.
Mhm. I think, like when you pick up a box of cereal or whatever, it gives you all the ingredients and everything. I wish everything did, like
Mm-hmm.
a little bit of a background. I think we would pick up less of certain things if we knew what was the true price tag that went behind it.
So I know I have talked about your memoir. I will make certain to include a link. I'm also going to include a link to your own website as well as your podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, Shama also has her own podcast, and why don't you take a moment to tell us about that and other things that you have going on right now?
Oh, thank you. My podcast is titled From Passion to Purpose,
Mm-hmm.
and it focuses on nonprofit leaders, mostly executive directors and founders, and what drove them, what passion drove them to start this, and hopefully it's going to be a resource for rising leaders in that field, and also create a sense of community, because we get so kind of focused and are in our silos working, and the way funding is structured in the nonprofit field, we're so in competition,
Yeah.
which is unfortunate because we're all doing good work for good causes. And so I'm hoping that that kind of breaks down, because we're openly sharing, because we genuinely want everybody to succeed, and not, yeah. So my podcast, and then as you mentioned, I wrote my memoir, She Called Me a Throwaway. And then I have written also a nonprofit fundraising book that it's called Nonprofit Fundraising Lessons from the Trenches. And yeah, and just I have launched a consulting firm, which is Case for Support Consulting, that I help. Ideally, what I want to do is work with small to middle size nonprofit that are just getting going, and helping them come up with a development plan and kind of a roadmap into how to increase their capacity and their ability to sustain in a competitive environment.
That's exciting work. You're making a big difference out there. Thank you for all of that.
Well, thank you. This was great. So you're doing a great job.
I am so glad we got to connect. I learned a lot. Well, I see and learn things from you on LinkedIn. You shared a lot of insight in your memoir. I was awed by it. This has been a delight to talk with a storyteller about my favorite thing. And I'm just really grateful for your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, please subscribe, leave a rating or review, or share it with others. You'll find Comfy Chairs updates and other thoughts on leadership and learning on Instagram at 123 Limited. That's ONE23 LTD.